Hello, welcome back. A reminder that we're interrupting our normal coverage to bring you open-ended coverage of the start of the ground war against Iraq in Kuwait. Any minute now, I'm told, President Bush, who is back at the White House, will make a statement on the war. We will bring you that as soon as we get it. First, a summary of the latest from the ground war from Ann Lucas.
Thank you, John. The ground war has begun. It's been confirmed by officials in Washington and London. A Pentagon spokesman said this is the end game. President Bush has arrived back at the White House from Camp David. He'll talk to reporters in the White House briefing room in a couple of minutes. Military sources say a broad offensive was underway, with Allied troops engaging Iraqi forces along a 125-mile front. The CBS networks say the 17,000-strong US amphibious force was in position off Kuwait. Other reports, not confirmed officially, say large numbers of Iraqi troops have already begun surrendering. Iraq has retaliated by firing a Scud missile on targets in Saudi Arabia. A senior Pentagon official says US Army General Norman Schwarzkopf, head of the American forces in the Gulf, had received the go-ahead to launch the attack at his discretion. It seems he's not wasted any time in getting the attack underway. John.
Thanks, Anne. We go straight over to Washington now, and our correspondent there, Bill Neely. Bill, the latest from you.
Well, we're waiting for President Bush, and after President Bush will come a Defense Department, a Pentagon briefing at 10:30. We don't know yet what will be in the President's statement, but he made it quite clear today that the deadline had passed, that Iraq had not complied with the terms set out in his deadline, and he had set out quite clearly before then that Iraq had to agree to these terms if a ground war was to be avoided. Norman Schwarzkopf, we heard earlier in the day, was given the green light to take whatever action he deemed necessary at whatever time he deemed necessary. It seems the President had signed an executive order even before today's deadline expired. That is, we don't have official confirmation of that, but that, from the reports we're getting of the ground war at the minute, would seem to be the case.
Yes, indeed. I'm looking here at some latest copy. President Bush apparently said in a statement, "We regret that Saddam Hussein took no action before the deadline to comply with the United Nations resolutions." Presumably he will expand on that in the statement that we're waiting for now.
Good evening. Yesterday, after conferring with my senior national security advisors and following extensive consultations with our coalition partners, Saddam Hussein was given one last chance, set forth in very explicit terms to do what he should have done more than 6 months ago: withdraw from Kuwait without condition or further delay and comply fully with the resolutions passed by the United Nations Security Council. Regrettably, the noon deadline passed without the agreement of the government of Iraq to meet demands of United Nations Security Council Resolution 660, as set forth in the specific terms spelled out by the coalition, to withdraw unconditionally from Kuwait. To the contrary, what we have seen is a redoubling of Saddam Hussein's efforts to destroy completely Kuwait and its people. I have therefore directed General Norman Schwarzkopf, in conjunction with coalition forces, to use all forces available, including ground forces, to eject the Iraqi army from Kuwait. Once again, this was a decision made only after extensive consultations within our coalition partnership. The liberation of Kuwait has now entered a final phase. I have complete confidence in the ability of the coalition forces swiftly and decisively to accomplish their mission. Tonight, as this coalition of countries seeks to do that which is right and just, I ask only that all of you stop what you are doing and say a prayer for all the coalition forces, and especially for our men and women in uniform, who this very moment are risking their lives for their country and for all of us. May God bless and protect each and every one of them, and may God bless the United States of America. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, any reports from the front? Soviets on board?
The President of the United States not taking questions. His brief statement over with that poignant plea to Americans and others everywhere of a mind to pray for the well-being of the Allied troops as they set out on their mission. He has authorized, said the President, General Schwarzkopf, and the others there to use all forces available, including ground forces, to eject the Iraqis from Kuwait, and he has every confidence, he said, that it could be swiftly and decisively done. Charles Beer.
We leave CNN there for the moment. President Bush addressing the nation there from the White House, he said the liberation of Kuwait is in its final phase. He also said that Saddam Hussein had redoubled his efforts to destroy Kuwait. And some news just in: the Iraqi ambassador to the United Nations in New York, in Baghdad's first reaction to the start of the ground war, said that his country would never surrender. I'm reading this straight off the computer here. Iraq will never surrender. A lot of Americans will die also. That from the Iraqi ambassador to the United Nations, the first official Iraqi reaction to the start of the ground war. Now, as I said, President Bush has just addressed the nation. Straight over to our correspondent in Washington, Bill Neely. Bill.
Well, that was a confident statement by the President. Swift and decisive were the two words that I picked out, which the Pentagon and the coalition have been saying all along would be the case. And also that support, that call for support at the end. Please stop and pray for the coalition forces. In a sense, he doesn't need to rally support. This is a president with overwhelming support in this country. 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 Americans almost support the idea of a ground war. I think over the last 2 days, you've seen a president and an administration which believes it has recaptured the moral high ground in its battle with Saddam Hussein. Here was a man who, during his peace talks with Tariq Aziz, was in Moscow talking peace, was setting fire to the oil wells in Kuwait. We heard at the Pentagon briefing earlier today that the Iraqis had stepped up summary executions of Kuwaitis on the streets of Kuwait City. I think the administration has got the moral high ground now to launch this war, and the President clearly believes it's necessary, and he's directed Norman Schwarzkopf to use all forces, including ground forces, to eject Iraq from Kuwait. That was a very confident and firm statement from the President.
Indeed, it was interesting to note how short it was. One might have expected a full explanation from him there as to why he's gone ahead with it, but really it was very brief, and he was calling on every American to stop what they're doing and pray for the Allied forces. As you say, it's as if the justification has already been taken care of.
I think he certainly explained it in full to his own country, and I think the coalition is as solid as it has ever been. There was a thought that when the peace plans were coming up that there might be Iraq might succeed in causing some fracturing of the coalition, but the French were there, even most of the Arab allies were 100% behind his stand to reject the Iraqi peace proposal, the Soviet peace offer, and the Iraqi acceptance of it. The coalition is solid. He's said over and over again that this is a just war, and I think in the last 2 days the Iraqis have handed him a couple more reasons for proving that this is, in his terms, is a just war. I don't think he needs to go into too much detail about why the war is necessary. I think he just needs to be confident, as he was, and say that this will be swift and decisive. That certainly is the coalition and the US plan.
Bill, any suggestion that he may have spoken yet to President Gorbachev? Because obviously the last-minute diplomatic manoeuvres by President Gorbachev to bring this to a peaceful conclusion at one time looked like succeeding. They're now obviously history, but relations between the two countries apparently not damaged.
The last call that we know of was the 28-minute call made just before the noon Washington time, 5 o'clock your time deadline. That was a conversation in which the President thanked President Gorbachev for his peace efforts. We don't know of a conversation since then. But what is clear is that the President has made extensive consultations with allies. We know he spoke today to the Turkish President Turgut Özal and to Japan's leader, and we must presume that he has spoken over the past couple of days with all the leaders of the coalition, making it firm, making it solid. This is a president who will not move before he consults fully with the coalition. That has been his hallmark throughout this crisis. He's leading from the front, but leading by consulting along his sides with his key coalition partners.
Bill, I see on copy here that a Pentagon source says the Defense Department does not plan to release many details of what is happening over the next day or two to avoid giving the Iraqis any information that could help them in selecting a possible location for a chemical weapon attack. So presumably we're not going to get firm details from your end as to exactly what is happening and where it's happening.
That was expected. We had been led to believe that there might be a 24-hour news blackout of details. I can only presume that the reporters at the front will be subject to the same restrictions, and they are clearly and very obviously there for reasons of national security.
Bill, thank you very much indeed. Now, just to bring you up to date, the ground war against Iraq has begun. It began 8 hours after the deadline passed for Iraq to withdraw from Kuwait. Now then, I'm joined in the studio by, sir, perhaps first of all you can give me your name.
Professor Donald Cameron Watt.
Professor Cameron Watt, you are an expert on diplomatic affairs. Why did the diplomatic efforts at the last minute fail?
Well, it was a scam. The six-point plan, the shorter Soviet plan, had two elements in it which nobody could possibly accept. The first of them was that the existing UN resolutions would have been declared null and void. That would have meant, among other things, the UN resolution which declared the Iraqi annexation of Kuwait null and void would have been removed, and then presumably would therefore have been accepted. Equally, the resolution which authorized the UN forces to apply for peace and security, that would have been rescinded. The idea the Russians had that the peace and security would have been restored if Iraq withdrew from Kuwait is obvious nonsense. You've got the fourth largest army in the world. That's not peace and security in that sort of area if you let it return to base because nothing happened. The other thing is that point 6 of the thing was even more of a scam because it swallowed the Iraqi story. This wasn't a dispute between Iraq and the UN. This is a dispute between Iraq and President Bush and his nefarious allies. And I don't think that, again, could have been accepted for a moment. And I'm really surprised that the Russians put both those in. But we did get a clue from the Russian spokesman who said this was best could be done at the moment. Some Russians, I think, are going to be very angry. Mr. Primakov, who threatened us if we didn't accept this. But I think the Gorbachev and the Russian foreign ministry generally, will simply write this one off as something they tried and failed with. But I don't think they expected to succeed.
Also, on the most basic level, the first clause of the agreement said an unconditional withdrawal. Iraq agreed to an unconditional withdrawal from Kuwait, followed by a string of conditions.
Oh, I know. Well, unconditional to us means what it meant during the Second World War. I mean, get out and knock your head on the floor and say you're sorry. I don't think Saddam Hussein had got that far yet.
Do you believe that President Gorbachev was in any way trying to take the initiative away from the Allies?
I think what President Gorbachev was trying to do was to persuade the Iraqis to see sense so that he could then cash in on as being the man who brought peace. You know, he'd have been in line for another Nobel Peace Prize and a lot of other things probably as a result of it. But I think that's about as far as he had gone, because one thing the Russians don't have is anything very much in the way of aid to clear up the mess. And that, I think this was a bit of a throw. I think it was forced on him by some of the hardliners in Russia and the army who don't like to see Iraq dismantled. And there are a lot of exaggerated fears. You find them, I think it's one of the reasons for Iranian activity at the moment. The idea that, listening to some of the wilder voices from around the Pentagon, that there are going to be American forces in the Gulf for the next 20 years or so. No Congress is going to pay for that.
Professor Cameron Watt, thank you very much indeed for joining us. An update now on the very latest from Anne Lucas.